one and all, and a warm welcome to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Anil Chandra sir, and to all our viewers. I'm Dr. Anu Vashish, host for tonight, Membership Director at Sinodent. I have with me Dr. Shivam Bharadwaj. He is COO and Co-Director at Sinodent. I would like to thank our founder and CEO, Dr. Anmol Bagaria, for introducing such amazing webinars for all the practitioners. Now, Sinodent is a unique platform, first time in India, a digital healthcare platform that provides and enhances a good relationship between patients and doctors. It also enables real-time scheduling system. Our goal is to create an easy access to healthcare services and communication ways or appointment scheduling system, not only between the dentist and the patient, but also for medical practitioners, diagnostic lab, to radiological services and pharmaceutical services. Sinodent brings together at economic prices and minimum waiting time because everyone has 24 hours and want to utilize it well. Sinodent is also working for social welfare and humanity to enhance the quality of life by providing healthcare needs, healthcare awareness, and free treatments. Now, Sinodent has started organizing amazing webinars for the benefit of all learning minds. We have with us today Dr. Anil Chandra sir. He has done his BDS from KGMC Lucknow in 1983, MDS in Operative Dentistry from prestigious university BHU in year 1986. He is actively involved in teaching at both UG and PG level since 1986. He has guided more than 58 dissertations and has more than 100 index international and national publications. In the University of Medicine and Dentistry, USA, he has worked as a visiting scholar in the Department of Restorative Dentistry in 1999, 2003, and 2006. He has received training in aesthetic dentistry at Salt Lake City, USA, advanced training on rotary endodontics at Switzerland, and has conducted more than 100 workshops and lectures at different platforms all over the country in last 10 years. He's a member of American Association of Endodontics, Canadian Academy of Endodontics, British Society of Endodontics, American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry, Academy of Operative Dentistry, British Society of Restorative Dentistry, European Tissue Repair Society, Academy of Dental Material, International Association of Dental Traumatology, and Asian Pacific Endodontic Confederation. He has been awarded with Fellowship of Indian Board of Micro Restorative and Endodontics in November 2018 and Fellowship of American Academy of Dentistry during Hong Kong convocation in September 2012. Sir, it is a pleasure for us to have you today, and I would like you to begin with your session.
Thank you, Dr. Anu. Thank you, Dr. Anmol. Thank you, Shivam, for giving me this opportunity to interact with all the audience on this important aspect of root canal treatment. As such, the topic today is related to more of microbiology, but I'll try to make it a little more interesting because it's a dry subject when we talk of clinics and all. But it's nonetheless, it's a very important aspect because your success and your failure depends upon how you can manage the pulp tissue, the microflora which is present in the root canal root canal system. Can I share my screen?
Yes, sir, it's visible. You can start the screen share.
Okay. So it's going to be next half an hour, 45 minutes, or maybe 1 hour. We'll be discussing about apical periodontitis vis-a-vis endodontic failure. So we all have had our share of root canal successful treatment. as well as our failure also. So what is the role of apical periodontitis? What is apical periodontitis and how it affects our success or failure? That we'll be discussing today. This is the college where I work, one of the oldest colleges in India, the King George's Medical University, which was established in 1909. This is a historical monument, and those who are associated with this college are always proud to be associated with this, having this affiliation. Very often when I ask the students, how will you define endodontics? Like, endodontic term is so popular. Like, once the student joined the course, you ask in which branch you have taken, they said we have taken endo. So my simple question to them is, how will you define endodontics? What is exactly endodontics? And they start giving a definition which is different. Everybody gives a different definition. So if you just simplify the definition of endodontics, it is actually around apical periodontitis only. It is basically the treatment and prevention of apical periodontitis. If we are able to prevent apical periodontitis, if we are able to treat apical periodontitis, that covers the entire syllabus of endodontics. All of us are more interested as an endodontist, as a conservative dentist, in saving the teeth by doing conventional or non-conventional root canal treatment or surgical root canal treatment, and we are not in favor of removing the teeth as such, as long as possible it is possible to save the teeth. Now, what actually is apical periodontitis? It is caused primarily by the bacteria which is present in the root canal space. Now the question comes is from where the bacteria is coming. Sometimes we have a patient coming to us with trauma, discolored tooth. Patient is absolutely asymptomatic. There is no fracture of the crown. And once we open the canal and remove the fibrous pulp from the canal, that canal is very unlikely to have any microorganism inside. As long as it is not exposed to oral cavity in some form or the other, either by fracture or by exposure due to abrasion, the microflora will not enter the canal. Therefore, the logical treatment aims to remove as many as of these bacteria which are present in the canal, if they are. So first we have to understand the conditions where we'll have microflora in the canal, and then we'll be able to understand better the condition where the microflora is not there in the canal. So there are two specific conditions. Now, a patient has come to you with complaint of sensitivity to hot and cold. You examine the case, you take an X-ray, and you see there's a big carious lesion proximal or occlusal. Then, but the tooth is non-tender. So that means the apical periodontitis has not settled in. Periodontitis has not settled in. The chamber is not exposed to the oral cavity. The chances are less that the canal system will have microorganisms, or maybe it will have some microorganisms in the coronal area only. Apical periodontitis will only settle in once the toxins from the bacteria which are released in the canal crosses the apex. If the bacteria are removed to the level that are undetectable by the bacteriological methods in use today, an extremely high success rate in resolution of apical periodontitis can be expected. It is scientifically documented procedure for the best results in root canal disinfection that is based on complete cleaning and irrigation of the root canal system. So if the patient is there with complaint of sensitivity to hot and cold without apical periodontitis, as per my experience, it is going to be a very good case for a single visit root canal treatment. But the moment apical periodontitis settles in, the entire microflora of the canal system changes. You can imagine there are about 110 to 115 different species of microflora which are present in the canal, which have been isolated from the canal, and out of them 10 to 15 are there at one time. So we need time. We need time to clean and shape the canal. We need time for irrigation. We need time to put our medicament in the canal before we can think of completing our root canal treatment. Mechanical instrumentation, that means the cleaning and shaping of the canal, causes 100 to 1,000-fold reduction in the number of bacteria which are present in the canal, but complete elimination in only 20 to 43% of the cases. Now you'll appreciate that despite our claims, by enlarging the canal 3 times of the original size, we feel that the canal has been cleaned completely. We cannot see the bacteria which is present in the canal. We can believe that by enlarging the canal, we have removed the majority of microorganisms from the canal. With antibacterial irrigation. But we are not sure that 100% bacteria has been removed from the canal. Regardless of your instrumentation system or irrigation protocol, we can just assume that root canal is clean, and that mostly we decide on the basis of the clinical signs and symptoms which are present in the patient. So basically it is an inflammatory lesion, the apical periodontitis, in the periodontal tissue that is caused mostly by bacterial elements derived from the infected root canal system. So once the pulp space is infected, it is loaded with microorganisms that it causes inflammatory lesion in the periodontal tissue, resulting in apical periodontitis. Now, if you are not able to treat the apical periodontitis, then it becomes a chronic infection and may lead to a secondary infection subsequent to endodontic treatment procedures. So in a non-treated apical periodontitis, it represents a defensive response to primary infection in a root canal, in a necrotic pulp. Extrusion of certain medicaments or root canal filling material or root filling material into the periapical space may also cause toxic effects, as well as they precipitate the foreign body reaction, something like this. Pushing out debris during the canal preparation, during filing, during filling, placement of sealers. If the canal is not clean, we are going to push the debris beyond the apex, resulting in flaring of the infection after your obturation. So these are the 2 potential sites for the emergence of endodontic lesions in periodontium, that is from the lateral canal and towards the apex, which may lead to development of apical periodontitis. This also serves an important protective function, which is aimed at confining the bacteria which is discharged from the root canal space, preventing them from spreading into adjacent bone marrow spaces and other remote sites. This is the other aspect of apical periodontitis, that it serves as an important protective function at confining the bacteria which is discharged from the root canal space and preventing them from spreading into the bone marrow space and other remote sites. And the process is unique in the sense that it cannot eradicate the source of infection. It will only contain it. The reason is that once the pulp has become necrotic, defense mechanism cannot operate far into the root canal due to lack of vascular support. So these are the basic biology which we need to understand, which we have to keep in mind whenever we are diagnosing and planning to do a root canal treatment. So if we are not doing proper endodontic treatment, apical periodontitis may prevail chronically. So the basic pathophysiology of the apical periodontitis we need to understand. The incidence of apical periodontitis in the root-filled teeth, if we look at it, so those teeth were root-filled without radiological evidence of apical periodontitis at the baseline. Data on when the teeth were endodontically treated and on which indication is not available. If you see the follow-up in the study for about 20 years, the incidence of apical periodontitis in the root-filled teeth was not there, and incidence of root canal treatment was 5.5%. Now, apical periodontitis can be asymptomatic also and can be symptomatic also. Bone resorption is the most conspicuous feature of apical periodontitis and is unavoidable side effect of a defense process. As I told earlier, it's basically a defense mechanism. And bone loss that appears in the radiograph serves as the main clinical indicator for the presence of apical periodontitis, as many of these lesions are silent and prevail without overt clinical symptoms. A small smooth-walled periapical lesion or granuloma in the mandible of 12 to 14 years old, this is the case. Large caries is evident on the crown of the left mandibular molar, and there is inflammatory pitting of the alveolar bone. Inflammatory pitting of the alveolar bone, which we can see here. Now, the asymptomatic apical periodontitis, which we are discussing now, is mostly biofilm derived. Yet, acute forms do occur and may develop during expanding phase of initial lesion. While the symptomatic apical periodontitis result mostly from the action of planktonic bacteria. So there is a basic difference between the symptomatic apical periodontitis and asymptomatic apical periodontitis. The asymptomatic one is derived mostly from biofilms, and the symptomatic results mostly from the action of planktonic bacteria. The single lesion of apical periodontitis can be symptomatic or asymptomatic at different stages of their development and progressing on. By far, most cases of apical periodontitis are asymptomatic. The study, which was published in Endodontic Topics 2003. Different clinical presentations of apical periodontitis due to infected necrotic pulp. It can be exoral swelling, can be an intraoral vestibular swelling associated with severely broken down first premolar, and apically positioned radiolucent area in the left upper central incisor. These are the clinical presentation of apical periodontitis. The microbiological aspect, you can see epithelial strands in the periapical granuloma, epithelial strands in a periapical granuloma that seems to attach at the root tip. You can see it here. And we can also see the cells of periapical granuloma, that is the lymphocytes, macrophages, and the connective tissue fibroblasts. These are the three main cells in the periapical granuloma. Other cells like polymorphonuclear leukocytes are also found, but they are newcomers and not residents of granuloma. Remember, each of them was recently recruited and will die in a few days. But the typical cells are lymphocytes, macrophages, and connective tissue fibroblasts, which are present in the cells of periapical granuloma. Now, once we come across a case with apical abscess, it denotes the presence of pus within the lesion, and the abscess formation may reflect a shift in the cellular dynamics within a pre-existing apical granuloma or be a direct outcome of an acute primary infection. The connective tissue constituents are degraded and the tissue in the center of the lesion is liquefied, forming an apical abscess. Similarly, the apical cyst, which is an epithelium-lined cavity that contains fluid or semi-solid material, is commonly surrounded by dense connective tissue. Now, what are the interactions with the infective microbiota? The microbial infection is an absolute prerequisite for the emergence of apical periodontitis in a non-treated tooth. That if the tooth is non-treated and the periodontitis is there, there is a presence of microbial infection, and that is an absolute prerequisite. The necrotic tissue alone in the pulpal space is unable to sustain inflammatory lesions, and this may occur sooner or later as a necrotic tissue, like anywhere in the body, serves as a growth medium ready for microbial colonization. Following an ischemic injury by trauma, total pulp necrosis may develop without bacterial involvement. As I told you earlier, sometimes we come across cases when the patient has come to us with a discolored tooth, central incisor, history of trauma 10-15 years back, but there is absolutely no pain or tenderness. So we have to remember that apical periodontitis will not be established unless the pulpal space is infected. And then it may be primary, or it may be secondary. Lead to, if we don't treat the primary apical periodontitis, it may consequently go in and become a secondary apical periodontitis. Coming to the type of anatomic infections, according to the anatomical locations, it can be intraradicular or it can be extraradicular. At the time of participating microorganisms gain entry into the root canal, it can be primary, secondary, or persistent. Primary infection means the microflora is entering first time in the root canal system. Secondary means there is going to be a recurrence of infection in the canal, and persistent means there is a persistence of infection despite the treatment protocols which we are following. The periodontitis is persistent. So primary is caused by the bacteria that initially invade the root canal. That is basically a virgin infection. And it's a mixed flora, which is, as I told earlier, at one time 10 to 15 different type of microflora which are present in the canal, dominated by anaerobic bacteria, particularly gram-negative species. The secondary infection is caused by the bacteria that was not originally present in the root canal system. And they were introduced in the root canal sometime after professional intervention. Due to remnants of plaque, calculus, caries, leaking rubber dam, contaminated instruments, all these can cause secondary infection. Coming to the persistent root canal intraradicular infection, which is caused by microorganisms that in some way resisted intracanal antimicrobial procedures, that are not able to endure periods of nutrition deprivation in the prepared canal. It is also termed as recurrent infection. So primary infection, secondary infection, and persistent infection. Here, the gram-positive facultative bacteria, particularly E. faecalis, are predominant. And we all know E. faecalis is one of the most stubborn bacteria. It is most difficult to treat once it gains access into the root canal. So this is basically about periodontitis, the primary, the secondary, and the persistent. So these concepts must be clear in our mind, and accordingly we will decide the treatment protocol, whether we are going for a single visit or multiple visit, what what is the irrigation protocol we are going to follow. That all depends upon our primary diagnosis. Now, as I told earlier, the infections can be intraradicular or extraradicular. The extraradicular infections are characterized by microbial invasion of the inflamed periradicular tissues. Extraradicular infection can be dependent on the intraradicular infection also. That means if it's an acute apical abscess, it is basically an intraradicular but can develop into an extraradicular infection also. Independent extraradicular infection, which is most common, is apical actinomycosis. These are the cases presenting extraradicular biofilm formation in the form of calculus. You can see in the X-ray also very clearly. And here we can see this is the post-surgical treatment. The course and the severity of the tissue response to the root canal infection depends upon how your body is going to respond to it. It depends upon your microbial load. It depends upon the state of defense potential and host and type. These are the factors which will govern how your body is going to respond to a particular infection, whether it's intraradicular or extraradicular. In some patients, we will find that despite the high microbial load, because of the defense potential of the host is high, the response or the clinical implications, the clinical signs and symptoms are very, very on a low profile. But in some cases, with a little increase in the microbial load and poor defense potential of the host, it's going to be there is going to be a flare up and of the infection, which is often difficult to control. Now, what are the organisms which are basically present belonging to the anaerobic segment of microbiota, including the genera of the following, often associated with symptomatic and painful lesions of apical periodontitis? These are basically the Fusobacterium, the Peptostreptococcus. These are the anaerobic segments of microbiota, which are often associated with painful lesions of apical periodontitis. And sometimes the pain is so unbearable that the patient will wake you up in the midnight and call it, doctor, you did some treatment and now the pain is unbearable today. So these are the microorganisms which are responsible for that. Now the bacterial elimination in the periapical region is carried out by polymorphonuclear leukocytes. All the other constituents and the processes in the apical periodontitis may be viewed as serving this ultimate goal. Now, coming to the review, although the bacteria are often only transient visitors in the infection process, which are readily killed, but they may nevertheless find their way into the lesion tissue and establish themselves in the lesion more or less permanently, although they are only a transient visitors. The term extraradicular infection has been introduced in this context only. Two types of such infections can be discussed: bacteria in the chronic abscess with a persistent sinus tract, and bacterial cluster formation in the lesion tissue per se. Such bacterial presence will cease in most of the cases after adequate endodontic treatment. The evidence has also accumulated to indicate that other bacteria may aggregate and survive outside the root canal space also. Another form of bacterial aggregate may sometimes be found on the external root tip with a biofilm structure. So these are the potential positions of the bacterial front in a necrotic pulp inside the root canal, at a small distance from the apical foramen, at the apical foramen, and within the lesion per se. So presence of bacteria inside the root canal, at the apical lesion, and within the lesion per se. So these are the three places where we have found the evidence of bacteria accumulated mostly. Bacterial clusters within the tissue as well as bacterial biofilm on the external root structure may persist after conventional endodontic treatment, even though the root canal infection has been eliminated. Both types of infection thus represent true extraradicular infection. You can see the bacterial film which is present on the external root surface, and these are the nests of actinomycosis. The bacteria may occur in the lesion as either a film on the external root surface or as a nest, as seen in the picture. So apical periodontitis, coming back to it, should be considered as an inflammatory reaction in the pulpal periapical tissue to the presence of bacteria within the root canal system. This all picture is completely clear now. Results of the study have clearly defined the microbial differences between the primary endodontic treatment and the retreatment cases. That also we discussed a couple of slides back. Another important factor which is started to be evident during the last year is that microbes in the root canal can grow not only as planktonic surface, but also as a biofilm. This also we discussed earlier. Biofilms, what are biofilms? If you look at it, they are composed of microcolonies of bacterial cells that are distributed in a matrix, which consists of exopolysaccharides, proteins, salts, and cell materials, which constitute and form the biofilm. And this bacterial biofilm is reported to be the most common cause of persistent inflammation, which is present sometimes during and sometimes after the treatment. Because you know the morphology of the system, root canal system, is very, very complex, and this favors the growth of bacteria in the form of biofilm. Just by looking on an X-ray or a IOP X-rays, we may find that the morphology of the system is very simple, but it is not so simple. If we look at the CBCT, if you look at the 3D image of root canal, it is a very, very complex system. And there are plenty of places where the bacteria can hide in. And the developed presence of bacteria in those places results in apical periodontitis. It was in 1894, W.D. Miller was the first to publish observations from the root canal with infected pulp. And the management of persistent apical periodontitis is more complex and less uniform regarding the choice of intracanal medicament. So here are clinical judgment of what type of medicament, what type of irrigating protocol we are going to follow is of utmost importance when we count on the success of the root canal treatment. So this we all know, it's very clear by now that at one time in an infected canal, it's going to be around 10 to 12 different species of microflora which have been isolated from sample. Talking about the primary endodontic cases, the black pigmented bacteria, that is the BPB, are the species which have frequently been isolated. And then there are different species of microflora, which we have discussed earlier also, which are present in the primary endodontic infections. 26 to 40% of the root canals of teeth with apical periodontitis have got these microflora present in the canal. It was also seen that the root canals which were left unsealed at some point of time during treatment. Now, some of us, like we have the habit, the patient comes to us with pain, we open the pulp chamber and then we leave it open with the fear that the pain will not subside if we close it. Always remember, there is no concept of leaving the canal open now. Because the moment the canal is left open, it will harbor the enteric bacteria more frequently than the canals which were left sealed between the appointments. A very important point from the clinician point of view. 55% cases had enteric bacteria when they were left open, and 33% cases had non-enteric bacteria when left open. And once the enteric bacteria is there in the canal, it is we know that it survives at the low nutrient levels. It can survive the onslaught of calcium hydroxide also, which is one of the most common medicament, and it's very difficult to remove it from the canal. So for all the practical purposes, now we have to keep this in mind that we are not going to leave the canal open at any point of time between the appointments. The old concept was, if you remember, if you read the old textbook of Wien, which clearly says, old textbook, I'm talking about the old textbooks, which clearly says the day you file, you should not close. The day you close, you should not file. I think I have to share again.
Yes, sir.
Yes. It's okay now?
Yes, sir. It's visible now.
So we were discussing about the when to leave the tooth open during the treatment or not. The concepts have changed. So we are not going to leave the tooth open at any point of time between the appointments. And because it was seen that 55% cases had entry bacteria when they were left open and 33% had non-entry bacteria when they were left open. So for all the practical purposes, we must treat it as a law from now onwards that we are not going to leave the open once the canal is open. Another important concern from the clinical point of view is in the primary endodontic cases, it was seen that 35% of the cases had entry bacteria after the 10th appointment. We keep on, and because the patient never becomes asymptomatic, it goes on and on and on. And it was seen that in 35% of the cases, the enteric bacteria had made its entry into the canal after the 10th appointment. And it was frequently isolated in cases where there is a high number of appointments. So we'll try, as for the present concept, we must try to finish our case as early as possible. In view of the COVID also, whatever cases we are doing, maximum we are going to 2 sittings. Mostly we are trying to finish all the cases in single sitting unless and until there is a difficult clinical situation that we cannot completely clean and shape and obturate the canal in a single sitting. So minimum sittings, you are not going to close the canal or leave the canal open. It was seen that the microflora of the root field teeth, it is generally there in the canal. It is introduced into the canal because of the inadequate aseptic control, poor access cavity design, missed canals, inadequate instrumentation, leaking temporary or permanent restoration are the main factors. If you look at the success ratio, it was seen that even if you have done a very good root canal treatment, a very good obturation, but if your post-endodontic restoration or your temporary restoration is not good, it's poor, the success rate drops to about 40%. So from 90% of success rate, we are dropping to 40% if our post endodontic restoration is poor or is leaking. So that is critically important when we are talking of post-treatment disease or a retreatment cases. It is generally believed that the major cause of post-treatment disease, now we'll not call it as endodontic failure, we'll call it as a post-treatment disease after the root canal treatment, that is the presence of microorganisms in the apical part of the root canal. You know, the apical part, we have less number of tubules in the canal compared to the coronal third and the middle third. The bacterial penetration in the tubule is less compared to the coronal and the middle, but still the presence of microorganisms was seen in the apical third because we are not able to clean the apical portion so effectively as we do the coronal and the middle part. High prevalence of enterococci and streptococci followed by lactobacilli, actinomyces, peptostreptococci, or different type of microflora which have been isolated from the apical area. These may result in the post-treatment disease, or in simple words, if we call it as our endodontic failure cases. So if we are not able to treat the apical periodontitis properly, whether it's a primary or it's secondary, regardless of the cleaning and shaping and irrigation protocol, it is going to be, we are going to land up in a post-treatment disease regime. It is generally believed that the major cause of post-treatment disease after RCT is the persistence of microorganisms in the apical part of the root field teeth. And there is high prevalence of enterococci, streptococci, and these and many more species which are there in the apical area. Now coming to E. faecalis, we are discussing about E. faecalis because everybody is very much worried about E. faecalis, only though there are different microflora as we discussed which are present in the apical third, but everybody is more worried about E. faecalis. It has some virulence factor that could be the reason for survival of these microorganisms in the very harsh environment of the root canal system. Wide pH range up to around 11.5 of intracanal medicaments such as calcium hydroxide, which is generally a highly potent antimicrobial dressing, is not effective against E. faecalis. So we have to take care and we have to take all precautions, because normally E. faecalis is not there in the primary. Make sure that whatever treatment we are doing, whatever irrigation protocol we are following and instrumentation protocol we are following, we have to defer the development of secondary infection or post-treatment disease. Because once the post-treatment disease or the secondary periodontitis settles in, the presence of E. faecalis, as we discussed earlier, is there in 55% of the cases. And this E. faecalis has a property of surviving in the low nutrition area with minimum nutrition in the absence of oxygen. So it survives and it keeps on getting us the cases of persistent apical periodontitis. Another microorganism is Candida albicans, which we have to keep in mind. It is obvious that the yeasts are rare inhabitants of the untreated root canal, unless these canals have been left open to the oral cavity. So we come back to that again, that we are not going to leave our inter-appointment dressings open in any case. One of them is that both these microorganisms can survive as a monoinfection and can invade the dentinal tubules. Some characteristics which are common between yeast and enterococci. They can survive as a monoinfection and can invade the dentinal tubules. Studies have shown that sodium hypochlorite, one of the most popular intracanal irrigant, is a potent killing agent for Candida species, while they are resistant to calcium hydroxide. So our ultimate weapon against them is sodium hypochlorite. So we have to make sure that our hypochlorite reaches the apical third in the different apical ramifications in the root canal system. So the infections can be seen as a sinus opening. You can see this is all because of the root canal infection. Even the extraoral sinus can develop, and sometimes the patient will come to us after visiting the plastic surgeons or ENT surgeons and getting operated from them a number of times, and then this keep on recurring, and then ultimately, because the source of the infection is presence of a caries tooth which is there in the oral cavity. Radiographic features of symptomatic apical abscess. A localized abscess resulting from incomplete root canal treatment on a maxillary central incisor, and the flare-up or the cellulitis caused by maxillary premolars. These all are the different type of cases which we come across in the clinics in different age groups. Lower anterior teeth with periapical lucency. You can see it here. Upon opening the central incisor, copious amount of pus was drained in this case, and the diagnosis was Phoenix abscess. Phoenix abscess, as we all know, is basically in flare-up of a chronic apical periodontitis, asymptomatic. And once we do the instrumentation, there is a flare-up, and then it results in the formation of Phoenix abscess. So these are some more radiographic appearance which as it will appear in the asymptomatic apical periodontitis. Two distinct lesions are present at the periradicular regions of the mandibular first molar with necrotic pulp. So careful examination of your x-rays is very important. We cannot be very casual in our examining the x-rays when we decide the treatment protocol. So etiology of the post-treatment disease. When I say post-treatment disease, what we mean is the endodontic failure, cases of failed root canal treatment. So it can be a biological failure, or it can be extra-radicular infection, which can result in the failure. This is poor aseptic technique, use of incorrect irrigant, procedural errors, poor obturation techniques. These will come under the biological failure category. These are well in our control. We can avoid the biological failure of our root canal cases with proper diagnosis, proper treatment planning, proper aseptic technique, use of correct irrigation protocols, adequate knowledge of the internal anatomy of the tooth. That is very important for every endodontist or any dentist who's practicing, regularly practicing endodontic cases. The most important causative factor for a clinician, however, are those related to treatment planning and determining prognosis. To effectively plan treatment, the clinician may place the etiological factors into 4 groups: persistent or reintroduced intraradicular microorganisms, extraradicular infections, foreign body reaction, and true cyst. Biological failure we discussed, and it is well in our control, and we can take certain precautions and avoid these biological failures. It has been asserted that persistent or reintroduced microorganisms are the major cause of post-treatment disease. This is well established, and this is the microflora of the intraradicular infections, the facultative anaerobes, the obligate anaerobes, the gram-positive species, and the predominant bacterial species, as we discussed earlier, is E. faecalis. These are all what literature suggests, and these are all well-established facts. So in primary root canal infections, it is going to be a polymicrobial and dominated by anaerobes. Secondary root canal infections, facultative anaerobic gram-positive bacteria, principally Enterococcus species. In recent studies, the predominant cultivable species recovered from the root fill teeth with persistent periapical lesion and corneal leakage was Staphylococcus. This was isolated in recent studies. Coming to the persistent or reintroduced intraradicular microorganisms, improper access, inadequate cleaning and shaping, under or overextended fillings, or incompetent restorations. Iatrogenic accidents may happen, and anybody can do that. Missed canal, we all sometimes we are casual in our approach, we miss the canals, and that may result in the persistence of infection. Then we have separated instruments, these accidents can happen, and even if the instrument fracture, and if we are able to bypass it or remove it under magnification, that will take care of our recurrence of infection. Perforation, if our internal anatomy knowledge is not very clear, or a ledge formation if the instrumentation is not proper. These can happen, these accidents can happen, and they keep on happening with practitioners. Extraradicular infections, direct spread of infections to the periapical tissues through the periodontal pocket can happen. Extrusion of dental debris and microorganisms during cleaning and shaping, and overextension of infected endodontic instruments. Overextended root canal fillings, extrusion of root canal fillings, cellulose fibers from paper points can cause foreign body reaction and persistence of apical periodontitis. Separated instrument, of course, yes, if it is pushed beyond the apex, and if you are not able to bypass, can result in persistence of apical periodontitis. Scanning electron microscope micrograph of extruded gutta-percha observed in the root apex was not removed after endodontic treatment was seen under magnification of 25. This was the article which was published in Journal of Endodontics. Previous root canal filling material that extruded through the apical ledging during the removal of obturation, and they were not able to remove it, can cause persistence of apical periodontitis. Presence of cyst, whether it's true or it's pocket. Pocket cyst, we all know it can drain, and the true cysts which are present, they seldom heal following non-surgical endodontic therapy, and most of the time, if it's true cyst, if it's a pocket cyst, yes, it is going to drain non-surgically. If it's a true cyst, then we have to go in for surgical intervention. Now, a decision tree displaying the alternative actions and management of root fill teeth with apical periodontitis. That means you have done the treatment, the periodontitis is persisting. That means it has resulted in the post-treatment disease. Now there are two options: one to do a therapy, and second one is to not to do any therapy. If you are doing any treatment, you have options of doing surgical and non-surgical treatment, or simple is to do extraction with placement of processes or implants. Surgical treatment and non-surgical treatment, this again you have to decide. This is again a big judgment which you have to do, and it has been observed that surgical treatment initially gives a very high success rate, but in the long run, the non-surgical and the surgical, the rate of success is more or less the same. Sometimes when the patient is asymptomatic, even if there is a presence of radiolucency, we go in for no therapy, just keep on the monitoring the size of the lesion, periodic x-rays, and sometimes we can leave it as such. And why retreatment? Deciding on whether to pursue retreatment or not depends upon the variety of the factors. Tooth retention is the best possible, so we should always go in for a retreatment protocol despite the initial endodontic failure due to primary reasons or secondary reasons, the reasons which are under our control. The patient's need, age, and clinical expectations are all important considerations when we decide to go for a retreatment, whether to go for extraction or go for a retreatment. When we have to decide, then we have to see the age factor, the clinical expectations of the patient's need also. It is thereby essential to employ an evidence-based interdisciplinary approach that addresses the interest of the patient when determining the best possible course of treatment. Remember always that not all conventional root canal treatments are successful. Conventional endodontic retreatments are different from routine endodontic therapy. This we have to keep in mind, that what conventional root canal treatment we are doing and retreatment protocol which we are doing, they are not the same. The tooth which has already been treated without a success and a permanent restoration has been placed, they has to be dealt with in a separate way. So these are a variety of potential factors which we have to keep in mind, influencing the success of any endodontic therapy. Whether the apical pathosis has an effect on the success, yes. Extension of filling, observation period, obturation quality, all these factors will influence the success of any treatment, and then accordingly, if the treatment fails or there is a post-treatment disease, we have to think of it and plan accordingly. And the post-treatment disease or the endodontic failure has 4 possible etiologies. The microorganisms that were not being removed from the canal or during the previous treatment, bacterial recontamination into the canal system due to loss of fillings or post-endodontic restorations, microorganisms that survive in the apical tissue outside the canal system and are protected by a bacterial plaque or a foreign body reaction in the apical tissue, and the presence of true periapical cyst. As I told earlier, If there is a true cyst, it has to be operated. Non-surgically, it is too difficult to treat. The basis of success for endodontic treatment are defined in reference to healing and the disease as follows. Healed means both clinical and radiographic presentations are normal. Healing means it's normal clinical presentation along with radiolucency. And diseased means clinical signs and symptoms are present even if the radiolucency is decreasing. That means in an X-ray, we find that the radiolucency is decreasing, but the clinical signs and symptoms are persisting. So that will be categorized in the diseased category. So what we aim and look for is towards the healed category, or at least a healing category. That will decide the basis of success of the treatment. And success, as we know, can be from the patient's point of view, from the clinical view point of view, clinician's point of view, from the radiological point of view, and from the histological point of view. The patient's perception of success is what? There is relief from the symptoms, resolution of the swelling, absence of pain and tenderness, and the patient becomes happy. So in patient's term, that is success. Potential failure from the clinician point of view, there can be a potential failure and there can be established failure. Clinical features and radiological features, we can see what are the radiographical features in potential failure and what are the radiographic features in established failure. The success rate of the root canal treatment is, as we all know, is 86 to 98%, regardless of the treatment protocols what we follow, unless we are doing it very poorly or we are not able to diagnose the case. Some of the guidelines for the retreatment: persistent pain, swelling, presence of sinus, teeth with periapical disease, which is non-responsible to primary endodontic treatment. Endodontically treated tooth, again a chart which shows what type of cases will go for surgery, what type of cases will go for retreatment, what type of cases will go for follow-up, and what type of cases we are going to do no treatment. Again, established failure and potential failure. So how to decide whether to treat or to extract? Option 1, 2, 3, and 4. The decision dilemma: non-surgical treatment, periapical surgery, extraction, and implant. If clinical sign and symptom persists, non-surgical treatment, very simple. Periapical surgery at least after 2 times endodontic treatment has been done. Extraction and implants only in absence of periapical pathology. So this is very, very clear. Non-surgical retreatment if the clinical signs and symptoms are persistent. Periapical surgery when at least 2 times endodontic treatment has been done and it has failed. And extraction and implants in the absence of any pathology. So when making the treatment decision, the clinician should always consider the factors, including the outcome assessment, local and systemic case-specific issues, cost and the patient's desire and needs, potential adverse outcomes, and ethical factors. Studies have shown that a restored endodontically treated tooth and a single visit unit restored implant have similar success rate. So whether we go for a straight away implants or whether we go for a retreatment case, the success rate is more or less same if we are doing it following proper protocols. So this is again the diagnosis part. I think we have already exceeded some time. Shivam, I think we have exceeded our time for today.
So you can continue. There's no problem.
Yes, sir. Take your time, sir. It's okay, sir.
Yes, sir.
We are just having we're just listening with so interest, sir. Yes, sir.
So
We are glued on the screen.
I'll try to finish it as quickly as possible. The diagnosis and the treatment planning, mostly for retreatment cases or secondary cases. It is always important to take a very good diagnostic radiograph at various angles. So this is for failed root canal cases when we are going for retreatment, including a bite wing of the area in question. Otherwise, also in the primary treatment, when we are planning for the root canal, then also we have to take radiographs at the various angles, at least 2 IOP X-rays before we start the case. One at the right angles and one at the, if it's an anterior tooth, the cone should be mesially placed. If it's a posterior tooth, the cone should be distally placed. So that will give you a brief overview of the internal anatomy before we start the case. But once we are going for retreatment, then this becomes a must. So bite wing radiographs are very useful in determining the periodontal bone height and looking for caries under restoration or fracture. Most of the time we miss this. We don't take it. But this is very important that bite wing radiographs are very useful. So make it a habit of taking the bite wing radiographs also when we plan the diagnosis of case or treatment planning which we are doing. Of course, recent introduction of 3D has aided the endodontic treatment planning immensely, and now mostly we are going for CBCT to diagnose the cause of failure of root canal treatment, primary treatment, because we can always locate the untreated canal, which is sometimes difficult to locate in a 2D radiographs, root perforation, separated instruments, assessing the complex internal anatomy. Now, if you give me a choice of two things, like I have a choice of having magnification in my office or a CBCT in my office, I'll prefer to go for CBCT because this will give me exact internal image or internal anatomy, how to make my access opening very limited, because now I know the internal anatomy very clearly, how we should enter the canal and where we should enter the canal. Separated instruments, where it is located, can easily be done with the CBCT. So this is a very useful utility as far as the endodontic treatment is concerned. I know it's difficult for every practitioner to have CBCT in the clinics. It is good for college. It is good for some big cities, but in small cities, it's still a limitation is there. But in some cases, when we feel that the apical periodontitis is persisting or there is a failure of case, we have to take help with finding the cause with the help of CBCT. After making the diagnosis and the treatment decision has to be made, there are 4 options. First is do nothing. Second is extraction. Third is non-surgical treatment, and fourth is surgical treatment. So as I told earlier, if we are planning for non-surgical treatment of a failed case, we are going to do non-surgical retreatment at least twice, try it twice, and then we go for a surgical treatment. Straight away jumping to surgical treatment, yes, we can do if we are trained very well, because most of the time, even at the postgraduate level, I've seen that surgical training for surgical endodontics has become very low, very less, because most of the cases we are managing now non-surgical. The decision to save a tooth is based on the following facts: the restorability, the strategic location of the tooth, the health, periodontal health of the tooth, patient history, the patient finances, and the skill level of the dentist, whether you are trained or not to do a surgery or a retreatment protocol. Never hesitate to refer a case of retreatment to some expert if you think you are not able to do it, then spoiling the case. And if your initial diagnosis is good, believe me, chances of failure becomes very, very low. It is only when we don't plan it properly and we don't plan our equipment protocol, instrument protocol, the irrigation protocol prior to starting the treatment, the chances of failure becomes more. So accurate diagnosis, that is of prime importance. Restorability assessment, whether we are going to restore the tooth after doing root canal treatment. It is not just like that we are doing root canal treatment, and if we are not able to restore it after root canal treatment, then there is no point in doing root canal treatment, because we will ending up in failure ultimately. Better send it for extraction and implant. Caries risk and oral hygiene. If the patient is not able to maintain oral hygiene, if the caries risk factors are very high, then also we have to think twice before jumping into the primary or secondary treatment. Presence of cracks, root fracture and resorption, occlusion and parafunction also. These are the local factors that will influence our decision of making a choice between the root canal treatment, primary or a retreatment and implants. There may be different ways of treating a disease, but there can only be one correct diagnosis. So diagnosis has to be correct. The method of treatment, my treatment protocol is different, your treatment protocol is different, the third one is doing a different protocol. But if the diagnosis is not correct, everybody is going to fail. So a sound diagnosis may be arrived by following steps: gathering subjective information, recording objective information. Never base your diagnosis on only X-rays. Normally we see an X-ray and we decide whether to do root canal or not. But we have to gather subjective information as well as record our objective findings. And believe me, if your history taking is very good, you're recording objective findings, you have recorded very well, half of the battle you have already won. Your failure chances will be reduced. These are the things which will help you in making an accurate diagnosis, which we all know, we've studied also all these things. So once the diagnosis is done, it is an option between us to do nothing, extract, non-surgical or surgical. Teeth with inadequate root canal filling with radiological finding of developing persisting apical periodontitis or symptoms will go for a retreatment. Teeth with inadequate root canal filling when the coronal restoration requires replacement or coronal dental tissue to be breached will go for a retreatment. Teeth with an overextended root filling will go for a retreatment. Persistent apical radiolucency following treatment, if the shadow persists, if the radiolucency persists, clinical signs and symptoms persist, we have to go for a retreatment. Post-operative pain and tenderness, if it is persisting, we have to plan for retreatment regardless whatever the X-ray shows. Even if the X-ray shows your filling is good, but there is post-operative pain and tenderness, that means you have missed something somewhere. And you have to take an additional diagnostic aid like CBCT, and then you can arrive at a definite conclusion. Yes, I have missed this one. There's a missed canal. There's an improper apical seal, which may look good in a simple IOP X-ray. Presence of soft tissue swelling, intraoral sinus which is present will always, fistula formation again will recommend a retreatment. There are some contraindications also. When we do a treatment and the patient and the treatment fails and the patient comes to us for retreatment, compromised access, that is one. Compromised periodontal status, we are not going to take up this case. Even if somebody has done a primary treatment, we are not going to go for a secondary treatment or a retreatment. We'll send it for extraction and implant. If there's a vertical root fracture, straight away, we'll be sending it for extraction. And whenever there is root resorption. TMJ afflictions are there. See, these conditions make it very difficult for the primary treatment as well, and secondary treatment you cannot imagine also. Non-restorable tooth. If somebody has done a root canal treatment that's come to you for, then this teeth you are not going, this tooth you do retreatment. You know, such a big shadow here, loss of tooth structure, poor post-endodontic restoration. It's a very poor case for a retreatment. Anatomic limitations. If it's an anterior tooth, good. If it's a third molar, the choice is very, even if we are planning for a retreatment, we have to be very, very careful. So I think we'll take a pause here, and hopefully sometime in the future, I'll be back again with some. Today we just discussed about the diagnosis part and what is the basic microbiology of the canal, what treatment options, and how to plan our treatment. We have not covered anything related to treatment like irrigation protocol or access cavity or obturation techniques or retreatment thing. This I think will require a separate lecture, or maybe sometime in December if everything is okay, then maybe I'll come back and I'll take up the second part of this, which will be of more relevance to the clinicians. So thank you again once again for your patient hearing, and I hope that I'm able to convey the message of what is the basic biology of the canal, what things we have to keep in mind when we plan to diagnose a case, and how should we go ahead with our treatment protocol finalization. What are the causes of primary failure, what are the causes of secondary failure, and what type of cases we will take for retreatment. So thank you once again, Dr. Anmol and Dr. Shivam, Dr. Anu, for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all. And this is my email ID. If anybody has got any questions, they can mail me. I'll be very happy to answer. And this is my website. If anybody posts a question there also, I'll be happy to take.
Thank you so much, sir. Every word is just an eye opener for all of us. Actually, in our comment section also, there are several questions are there, sir, from our viewers. One question is from Sagar Kannauj. Any preferred sealer for cases of endoperio lesions, sir?
Actually, as I told earlier, this part covering, because it's an entirely different this thing. There is, but out of the context, I'm just telling that there is no preferred sealer. Like it's nothing like that. We'll use this particular in endoperio and this particular sealer in regular cases. But we'll discuss in detail when we talk about the obturation protocols in the next lecture. I'll be very happy to answer them, because otherwise the answer will be incomplete.
So it's just curiosity of our viewers. They just want to know more and more. Sir,
And commercially suggesting any sealer also is not advisable on my part.
okay, sir. Okay, sir. So second question is from Aisha. How can we handle a cyst of the lateral canals when we are doing this treatment?
Cyst, if it's a true cyst,
Lateral, yes, sir.
can through a pocket. Pocket cyst can be drained through the canal, but if it's a true cyst, it has to be operated.
Okay, sir.
Surgical treatment is the only management.
Okay, sir. So now third question is from Mohinsha Sahi. He is asking how to approach symptomatic retreatment cases.
Symptomatic retreatment cases.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The protocol is disassembly of the coronal restoration, removal of the entire gutta percha from the canal, irrigation protocol, which includes your regular hypochlorite and chlorhexidine also, and copious irrigation
Okay.
with agitation. See, if the symptoms are persisting, that means either the canal obturation was not proper and the space was there for bacteria to flourish.
Yes, sir.
Unless there is a perforation, which may also cause persistence of apical periodontitis. So we have to see whether it's a perforation there, or it's a pushing of the debris beyond the apex, which has not been controlled, or sealer beyond the apex, or gutta percha beyond the apex. So the cause we have to identify. Accordingly, we have to plan the treatment. There is no fixed protocol for the persistent apical periodontitis is there, and this is the protocol for that. The protocol will depend upon the diagnosis. What is the cause of that?
Okay, sir. Surely, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your gracious presence today. And thank you so much, sir, for inspiring all of us with your kind words. And it was just a condensed introduction, sir, which we has introduced you. We just made it from your brief profile, and your achievements and anything said is in your honor is less, sir. Sir, we are just very feel obliged to have you, sir, today.
No, no, nothing like
Thank you.
that. It's all, you should not believe all that what is written there.
Sir,
Maybe
thank you, sir.
after 30 years afterward, you'll also have same achievements.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, now I just like to call our CEO, my friend, Dr. Anmol Bagaria, to say something, sir. Please, please, Dr.
Thank
Anmol
you so
Bagaria.
much, sir, for giving us your valuable time this evening. Thank you for delivering such an informative lecture. Sir, it is an honor and privilege to have you here, and I'm sure the lecture, the way you have enhanced our knowledge and skills, it would help in more appropriate diagnosis and more proper treatment. So you are an inspiration to us, and especially to me. You inspire me to work more and more every day. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Anil and Shubham, and Anu also. And
Thank you
I'd
so
love
much,
to
sir.
come back sometime next month and
Sir,
discuss.
Our
we
pleasure,
surely
sir.
want to
Yeah.
know, sir, about the treatment and the about the second part of the story.
Yes,
We
yes.
just want to listen, sir.
It's difficult to cover everything in one session, actually.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
True, sir. True. Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank,
Once again,
Thank you,
have a
sir.
good night, sir. Thank you so
thank you.
much, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, viewers, for attending the webinar. And I appreciate for your patience to be here till now. And thank you so much. Have a good night
Thank you
to
for
all of you.
being with us today.